I'm Elisabeth Hashagen. Welcome to our live conversation on jobs and the future of work. You know, yesterday we got some good news when it comes to the economy when we take a look at that GDP growth, positive consumer spending, and indications that inflation is cooling. But we keep hearing about layoffs, especially at tech companies. And overall, there are still more jobs than people to fill them. So what does work look like for 2023? Here to answer that question and so much more, we have Bhushan Sethi. He's a partner at PwC's strategy and focused on business and organization transformation. He's got more than 25 years of global strategy and management consulting experience, and he is an adjunct professor at NYU Stern School of Business. And Dr. Brian Marks is with us. He's the senior lecturer of economics and business analytics at the University of New Haven, the executive director of its entrepreneurship and innovation program, and also the former legal and economic advisor to the Honorable Robert Davis, President Reagan Senate confirmed appointee in Commodities and Future Trading Commission. Now, do remember, we want to hear from you, so you can always join the conversation on our Facebook pages, comment, and add questions. All right, so we do need to start. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Marks. We've got this tight labor supply really having an impact on hiring in 2023.
So we're going to see it continue, at least for the first half of the year. And we have a lot of conflicting signals. So we have a tight labor market, but it's not in all segments. We're seeing certain segments loosen up, if you will. We've seen significant numbers in the tech sector. That has not filtered through the economy. And I'm sure Bhushan could add to this, in particular as it relates to the severance packages that many people are getting in the tech sector, maintaining a level of savings as opposed to having some of those people use their savings. In the meantime, again, it's almost, same story, different day. We do have people, though, eating into their savings. So we have a lot of mixed signals here and a lot of complication and uncertainty.
And Bhushan, when we take a look at that, those tech numbers, you see these large amounts of layoffs in all these different companies. But as, Brian was saying, they end up with severance. So those numbers aren't reflected in the unemployment data, week to week. We're not seeing that.
Yeah, morning, Elizabeth. We're seeing a lot of lag in the data. We're seeing, even though it's a small section of the workforce, we're seeing tech layoffs, we're seeing layoffs in media, we're seeing layoffs in financial services. It's creeping into every area of the economy, but it's not affecting the headline numbers, 3.5% unemployment. As Brian said, uncertainty is the order of the day. And you look at the mixed data, you look at earnings data. In some sectors, it's strong. In some sectors, it's weak. GDP was pretty good. Kind of yesterday's data, we are kind of ticking along in growth. Growth in the US is strong. We've just got so much uncertainty, whether it's economic, whether it's geopolitical, and we've still, through scenario planning that our clients are really focused on as the order of the day to say, in a different interest rate environment, how we're going to finance our investments, how we're going to think about pricing power, how do we think about kind of mergers and acquisitions. So uncertainty is the order of the day, and it's all about scenario planning for businesses right now and engaging their people throughout the course of this.
Yeah, I want to talk about employees, Brian, and they still really seem to be in the driver's seat at this point.
Again, there are opportunities out there. It all depends on what job you're looking for. So we are seeing some people now. January has hit. They've collected their bonuses, and now we're seeing a change in people's dance cards. Companies need to look. I think we may witness that some companies are going to be hesitant to lay certain people off because it's hard to refill the bucket with competent people, especially in the tech sector. Those are real challenges coming ahead. And I think CEOs in particular, they're doing that planning, but it's also trying to factor in the exogenous shocks. So it's not just the balance between management and labor, so to speak. It's also, and the interest rate environment, it's the exogenous shocks to the economy. And Bhushan mentioned geopolitics, and we can tick those off: war, energy, China. We got the politics here in the US with the debt ceiling. and then the last thing, something we cannot control, is the weather.
Is the weather.
So the best laid plans of mice and men may not come to fruition. So we have to do lots of scenario planning, as Bhushan said.
And let's talk about those CEOs, Bhushan. I know PwC really into this, great data now, new information coming out. Those CEOs, though, are the most pessimistic they've been in more than a decade, as we're seeing the world really face this new slowdown. Let's take a look at some of the data that's just out from PwC that finds some 73% of CEOs think that global growth will decline in the next year, Bhushan.
Yes, we released this survey last week, 4,400 CEOs across many different countries and sectors. By and large, they are pessimistic, much less than last year and much less than previous years. And if we look at what they're doing, Elisabeth, they're actually taking out costs in many different ways and being kind of prudent there. They're thinking about how they can look at different products and different services depending on the industry they're in. But surprisingly, the data is also showing that 60% of them are actually not considering headcount reductions and 80% are considering not reducing compensation. So a little conflicting with some of the earlier discussions we'd have and what we're seeing in certain sectors here in the US, but interesting around the cost, the levers they're using around managing cost.
Yeah, you know what I thought was interesting when it comes to empowerment and entrepreneurship, with their companies, they do believe that employees are aligned with their values and direction. That was 85% come in saying that. When you think about that idea of the hybrid workforce and company culture, we've had so many questions about that, Bhushan. I was like, wow, that's a pretty big number.
Yeah, the challenge there is going to come in the next 12 to 18 months. Everyone's still going through their experiments for hybrid work, Elisabeth, and leaders still have to learn new skills. We have to experiment, and all the data is pointing to workers getting tired, workers getting disengaged. The CEOs in that survey are actually looking to empower more of their people and actually try and unleash the creativity to say, how do people lean in and help transform business or help us with deals and help us with productivity improvements?
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, I wonder about that empowerment in our organizations and, giving people, I guess, a safe space to fail.
Well, I think that has been a mantra for many people for many years now. Failure, we'd like to say failure is an option as long as we learn, and maybe there's an element of resiliency. I also think many CEOs are trying to figure out how to create connections with their workforce to foster that creativity. And by the way, and those in the tech sector who are facing those layoffs, many of them are going to look at this as an opportunity to create new connections and new opportunities for themselves. So we may see a growth in entrepreneurship and innovation from this new segment of people who have been pushed out of the workforce by the various companies.
Absolutely.
And on that point, Brian, small business formation was one of the green shoots of 2022. I saw the data that it's actually small businesses that have actually created more jobs that have kind of been sticky during the past year. So you're absolutely right around kind of small businesses being kind of the bastion of that growth and innovation.
And I also wonder, too, about the effect that inflation is having on companies, whether they're big or small, because if we have the average household, that seems to be complaining about everything, what about these businesses? I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the inflation trend is going in the right direction. The Fed has been doing its job. Inflation complicates matters for the consumer. We see it every day. At the grocery store in particular. For corporations and small businesses, not necessarily mutually exclusive there, they're confronted with inflation in another way as well, and that's the relative price differences associated with the resources they need. So they're trying to figure out the price signaling for the allocation of their resources, and that creates a complication. And that's one of the costs of inflation. So the Fed will stay on track, even though most people would like interest rates to come down. I think we need to get some relative stability across our prices, not just in the aggregate level.
Okay, and we do know the Fed obviously meeting next week. Our conversation continues straight ahead as we continue to talk about jobs, your money, the impact of your pay on your wallet and your savings. Welcome back to our live conversation on jobs and the future of work. Do remember, we want you to join the conversation on our social media pages. Now, I do want to start, Bhushan, I'm going to start with you as we kind of take it from the employee perspective. If they're hoping that remote or hybrid work is here to stay, what's your answer to that?
It continues to be one of the most polarizing discussions in the workplace around the return to office plan. Most businesses that were in person before are trying to move to some form of hybrid around 3 days. Businesses that are making layoffs and younger people are kind of being encouraged to come in more. There are still going to be jobs that are fully remote, but they're going down. I mean, the data is telling us that more and more job openings are not for fully remote jobs now. More and more managers, leaders are publicly saying they want people back in the office. And in certain industries that are making layoffs or making hiring freezes, people are going to be uncertain and concerned and going to come back to the office. But it still feels like this standoff between management and employees. But again, we're still settling into this 3-4 days a week, different in different sectors, and this experimentation, which will continue to run throughout the course of this year.
Yeah, because we've seen this obvious acceleration in remote work, that most likely would not have happened at this pace, if not for the pandemic. But now, how do we live in this space and make it work with companies' cultures, Brian?
Well, that's the key thing, and that's the battle, because companies need to build loyalty and connectivity. So we're not going to have a constant revolving door. And so the encouragement, the moral suasion, if you will be to encourage people to come back at least for some period of time each week or every other week to ensure we're building that loyalty and connection to the organization. From the employee standpoint, that provides the same thing, because one of the other things that we tell young individuals, you need a mentor and you need networking. And those two things cannot necessarily be achieved in a flat Stanley type environment, a two-dimensional environment, if you will.
I wonder too, so okay, we have, the remote or the hybrid, but then what about the people that are just not working? If you take a look at this data, to me, it boggles my mind. There's this large number of American men that are not working and not looking for work. There are nearly 800,000 manufacturing jobs open in the U.S., yet more than 7 million prime age men have just essentially dropped out of the workforce. These numbers, are the latest federal count. And we're just taking a look at really what seems to be, Bhushan, this long-term decline in, 25 to 54-year-old men working.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we've spent a lot of time talking about kind of the caregivers kind of leaving the workforce, retirees retiring early, but we haven't talked about this phenomenon of kind of the young prime age working man that was an issue before the pandemic because of health reasons and personal choices. What we need to do is, as business people, we need to kind of create on-ramps and forums to say, how do we bring people back to the workforce? Whether that's training, whether that's worker development, whether that's better education with school, whether it's better entry-level jobs. But there is an issue there, and people need, especially younger in their career, whatever they do, the dignity of work, the ability to connect with other humans. It's so important, not just to business, but for society and in our community. So it's a really scary stat when I look at that.
Absolutely. And then I think, too, from the business side of it, if these businesses have all these open jobs, how much revenue, Brian, are they missing out on because they're not able to, crank out the business that they need to?
Well, one way to look at it is it's another supply chain issue. And we're talking about a supply chain of people. What we have to also realize, we need to have a match of skills. And just because we have openings does not mean we have a match of skills in the labor force to match those particular openings, or given the skills of certain individuals, such as someone in technology who's a software engineer, is not likely to fill that manufacturing job. The other complication, as many companies, because of the pandemic, have been looking at reshoring and going through that aspect, we're finding a lack of available people for those jobs who would be interested in those jobs. So in the long run, it does impact top line revenue and the ability to grow one's business until you can rebalance your workforce, which may result in a lot of automation.
Oh, that's
this is also where the Inflation Reduction Act can actually help. There's a big bet on creating new jobs, infrastructure jobs, greener jobs, etc. Starting that reskilling now and that education now to say, how do we bring prime age men back into the workforce for those future jobs? I mean, the challenge here is there's more. We don't have enough people. We don't have immigration, and we have more jobs now. We'll have more jobs tomorrow. So it's a big supply demand mismatch, like you said, Brian.
Yeah,
oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
No,
I'd just like to know those who are not re-engaging in the workforce, so to speak, what are they doing?
Well, that's the crazy thing. Did you take a look at that data point, Brian? 6 hours, 53 minutes of leisure time. 6 hours and 53 minutes of leisure time. That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Yes, and what we're seeing is maybe people are staying up later. And we're recording that data, but it's not only about leisure time, it's what else are they doing?
Right.
It's not necessarily as if they're not generating any income. There's no doubt some may be leveraging savings that they've built up in the run up to the market, and they've moved very quickly their portfolio. So that's one aspect. Others, which may not be caught in the data, and there's a lag, so to speak, that what we're seeing is people are trying to re-image, restructure themselves for their own personal opportunities rather than in the general workforce. So we have a lot of mixed signals here, absolutely. We have a lot to unpack, and as I've said before, the devil is in the details.
All right, and we're going to get more of those details. Actually, both of you will be joining me when we get a look at the jobs report. That comes out next Friday. Obviously, that's, backwards looking data, but just another snapshot of how we're doing. Our conversation continues straight ahead. Welcome back. It is time now for our 2-minute takeaway on jobs and the future of work. Dr. Marks, I'm going to start with you. And I know you said same story, different day.
Yeah, absolutely. We started the program that way. We have a lot of conflicting signals. The labor market remains tight. Wages are up, notwithstanding layoffs in tech. Inflation seems to be moderating month over month, but still high. So we can't ignore that. We saw wonderful economic development and growth in real GDP Q4 and year over year, a little bit better than expected. The big thing is the Fed.
Yeah.
We can anticipate, and the Fed has signaled this, another 25 basis point move. They're going to continue that pressure. And the big uncertainty as we roll forward through 2023 continues to be the geopolitics, the politics of the debt ceiling, and the uncertainty that we all have to face and make decisions without the uncertain environment.
And also the fact that, a soft and a hard landing aren't mutually exclusive. For some people, it will be a hard landing. For others, it won't.
And you're absolutely right. And I've talked about this before. Depending on which side of the coin you're on, and there are 3 sides to every coin. It could be soft, hard, and for others, it's life as usual.
Right. All right, Bhushan, I know you wanted to talk about the balance in delivering short and long-term goals.
Yeah, there's real tension right now between how do I stay viable as a business in the short term so I can earn the right to deliver on the long term. And like we said, that's all about looking at economic data, looking at your customer data, looking at your business data, and actually making decisions through scenario planning. It's also making those decisions very quickly. If there's a existential shock or a climate issue or a geopolitical issue, making a quick decision around your business and your product service and your business model is going to be critical. You're not going to get everything right, so taking some bets and taking some risks is going to be the order of the day. To do all of that, you've got to engage, inspire, and enable your people, your leaders, your teams, your contingent workers, etc. So uncertainty, it's difficult to manage the short and long term, but businesses have been here before and done this. They've just got to kind of do this in a more planful way with more data and not forget about inspiring and enabling their people.
I like how you say take selective risks.
In certain industries, we don't take as many risks. In, say, the tech sector and the pharma sector, like if we hadn't taken risks, we wouldn't have vaccines. So I think that there's some selective innovation and risk taking, but really empowering the grassroots people in the organization, the frontline workers, to actually say, where can we make improvements?
All right, and really quickly, if we can, I just want to mention those quit rates because they've fallen from that, 2021 peak, but they're still historically high. We've got 3% for private employers, 2.7% rather, for non-farm jobs. That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we see those people that are quitting, Brian, making more money.
Well, I think this goes to something Bhushan said. We're looking at corporations managing and making selective risks. Individuals are doing the same thing. And this environment is providing them the opportunity to take selective risks and change jobs with a significant upside in compensation at the same time.
All right. Thank you both so much. I look forward to next week when we will be breaking down the latest jobs report. I appreciate your time and your expertise. All right, next week, we're going to help you avoid a tech headache. We've got the steps you can take to make existing online in 2023 a little less stressful.